For centuries, her name has been whispered, inextricably linked to tales of insatiable desire and a staggering number of paramours, a figure often cited as high as 500. Yet behind the lurid myths of secret boudoirs and scandalous affairs lies a far more complex truth about one of history's most formidable empresses, a woman whose power was so immense it threatened the very foundations of patriarchal Europe, sparking a smear campaign that endures to this day. Was Catherine the Great a serial seductress, or was her reputation brutally forged in the fires of political intrigue and misogyny? If you're drawn to stories where the lines between history and legend blur, where powerful figures are both celebrated and scandalized, then join our journey through the past. Hit that subscribe button, let us know what truths you uncover, and share where in the world you're tuning in from. Born Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729, she emerged from the humble obscurity of a minor German principality, a territory so small and unremarkable that it offered little hint of the monumental destiny that awaited its young princess. At the tender age of 14, Sophie's world was irrevocably reshaped when she was chosen for a dynastic marriage, destined to become the bride of Grand Duke Peter Fedorovich, the heir presumptive to the vast and formidable Russian throne. Imagine the sheer audacity of this transition. A sheltered girl, suddenly plucked from the familiar rhythms of her quiet German court, embarking on an arduous journey across immense European landscapes. She arrived at a dazzling, yet utterly alien, imperial court in St. Petersburg, a gilded cage where every gesture, every whispered word, every nascent ambition would be dissected, judged, and scrutinized by a network of watchful eyes. Her subsequent conversion to Orthodox Christianity and her ceremonial adoption of the name Ekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine, marked not merely a religious transformation, but a profound cultural, spiritual, and political baptism. It was a complete shedding of her old identity, an immersion into the rich, yet often treacherous, Byzantine complexities of Russian royalty, a world demanding both piety and ruthless pragmatism. Her marriage to Peter, a first cousin by blood, was a catastrophic mismatch, almost laughably so, from its very inception. Peter was a tragic figure of arrested development, profoundly immature, deeply insecure, and intellectually stunted. His proclivity for cruel and sadistic impulses found more expression in grotesque childhood games, playing with toy soldiers and torturing animals, than in the grave affairs of state or the company of his brilliant, ambitious, and increasingly frustrated wife. While Catherine, even in her youth, devoured books on philosophy, history, and the radical Enlightenment thought that was sweeping Europe, Peter would stage boisterous mock battles in their private apartments. He'd command real soldiers and even servants, disturbing the Grand Duchess's quiet studies with cannon fire and simulated cries, shattering any semblance of peace she might have found. He openly mocked her intellect and appearance, flaunted his various mistresses with brazen indifference, and subjected her to relentless psychological torment, frequently threatening her with imprisonment, divorce, or even violence. This drove Catherine into a profound and gnawing isolation within the ornate, yet claustrophobic confines of the imperial palace, a gilded cage where she was surrounded by people, yet utterly alone. Beyond the personal agony, their union was meant to secure the Romanov succession, yet it proved barren for nearly a decade, a glaring dynastic failure that heightened the political pressure on Catherine to an unbearable degree. Whispers about her fertility, or, more damningly, Peter's, grew louder with each passing year, placing the future of the empire in peril. The absence of a legitimate heir was not merely a personal disappointment. It was a profound crisis for the stability of the entire dynasty, fostering an atmosphere ripe for conspiracy and political upheaval. With Grand Duke Peter seemingly incapable or unwilling to fulfill his marital duties, a fact widely known and discreetly lamented within court circles, and the reigning Empress Elizabeth desperate for the continuation of the Romanov line, the court, subtly and overtly, began to look elsewhere for a solution. It was in this suffocating atmosphere of neglect, dynastic peril, and unspoken desperation that Catherine's first significant relationship outside her marriage began. This liaison, often portrayed as a scandalous act of infidelity, was, in many ways, an act of imperial duty, an attempt to secure the very future of the throne she would one day occupy. Sergei Saltykov, a dashing, sophisticated chamberlain, renowned for his charm and intellect, became her confidant, offering the intellectual companionship and emotional solace so cruelly denied to her by Peter. By many accounts, he also became the father of her son, Paul, born in 1754. The paternity of Paul the Schrites remains one of history's most enduring mysteries, a shadow that would follow Catherine and her son throughout their lives, a potent symbol of the desperate circumstances that often dictated the intensely personal lives of royalty. These early clandestine relationships, born out of a stark necessity, driven by profound loneliness, Peter's utter disregard for her, and the crushing weight of dynastic expectation, were far more than fleeting dalliances. They were the very first tremors of what would later erupt into a volcanic eruption of rumor, scandal, and political intrigue, often used as potent ammunition against a woman who, against all odds, dared to seize absolute power for herself. The reality of Catherine's love life, when stripped of the sensationalized gossip, reveals not a promiscuous queen with hundreds of casual dalliances, but a powerful, intelligent woman who chose a select few partners, often for political expediency, deep affection, or intellectual companionship. Unlike male monarchs who could maintain a stable of mistresses with little public outcry, Catherine's choices were scrutinized, politicized, and weaponized with a ferocity that few male rulers ever faced. She was a woman in a man's world, wielding absolute power, and her personal choices became a battleground for her legitimacy. For an empress to openly choose her partners, and often to elevate them to positions of immense power and wealth, was seen as both a revolutionary assertion of female agency and a dangerous defiance of conventional morality, particularly by those who sought to undermine her rule. Her personal life, therefore, was never simply personal. It was an extension of her political strategy and a constant subject of international intrigue. Her most significant relationships were far from fleeting affairs. They were profound partnerships that often shaped the course of Russian history. First among these was Grigory Orlov. A handsome, charismatic officer in the Imperial Guard, Orlov played an indispensable role in the coup d'état of 1762, which deposed Peter III and placed Catherine firmly on the throne. It was Orlov who rallied the regiments, Orlov who accompanied her on horseback as she rode to claim the crown, and Orlov who ensured her ascent was swift and decisive. Their bond was immediate and intense, forged in the white-hot crucible of shared danger and ambition. He was more than a lover. He was her co-conspirator, her protector, and for a time, her political muscle, an enforcer of her will in the volatile early years of her reign. They had a son, Alexei Grigorievich Bobrinsky, born in secret, a testament to the risks involved in their open, yet technically illegitimate, relationship. The child was swiftly removed from court, later educated abroad, and eventually legitimized by Catherine, albeit without succession rights, underscoring the delicate balance she had to maintain between her private desires and public duties. Orlov's influence was immense. He received vast estates, titles, and became one of the most powerful men in Russia, a visible sign of the Empress's favor and gratitude. However, his arrogance, increasingly public indiscretions, and declining mental stability eventually led to their separation. Despite the eventual rift, his partnership was a crucial pillar of her early reign, a true co-architect of her initial grasp on power. Then came Grigory Potemkin, a figure whose shadow looms larger than any other in Catherine's personal and political life. Potemkin was not merely a lover. He was her intellectual equal, her chief advisor, her military strategist, and the man many historians believe she secretly married in a clandestine ceremony in 1774. Their relationship, spanning decades, was a complex tapestry of passion, intellectual debate, political collaboration, and enduring friendship. Even after their romantic intimacy waned, he possessed a keen mind, boundless energy, and an ambition that matched her own, making him a unique and indispensable partner. Together, they orchestrated the annexation of Crimea, expanded the Russian Empire into the Black Sea region, and initiated grandiose projects like the famous and often exaggerated Potemkin villages, which were, in reality, impressive showcases of newly developed territories, designed to demonstrate the progress of her enlightened rule to visiting foreign dignitaries. Potemkin was her alter ego, her right-hand man, and their private correspondence, voluminous and remarkably candid, reveals a depth of affection, intellectual camaraderie, and mutual respect that transcends simple physical attraction. They discussed everything from philosophy and architecture to military strategy and governance, often in affectionate code. Even when he was no longer her physical lover, he remained her closest confidant, her most trusted advisor, and the de facto second ruler of Russia, wielding immense authority with her full blessing until his death. This enduring, profound nature of their bond, rooted in shared vision and intellectual synergy, truly set it apart. Following Potemkin, Catherine had a series of younger favorites, men chosen for their youth, charm, or agreeable nature, such as Alexander Vasilchikov, and later Platon Zubov, her final and youngest favorite. Yet, these were never casual encounters in the modern sense. The position of favorite at the Russian court was a highly formalized and immensely powerful one, a kind of unofficial royal consort, though without the threat of a formal marriage that could challenge Catherine's absolute authority. Each new favorite underwent a rigorous vetting process, often involving physical examination and discreet background checks, before being introduced to the Empress. Once chosen, they were showered with gifts, wealth, palaces, titles, and often elevated to high positions in the military or government, becoming conduits for petitions and sources of patronage. They were expected to be cultured, witty, discreet, and capable of providing both companionship and counsel. The system was undeniably costly, a significant drain on the imperial treasury, yet it provided Catherine with companionship, emotional support, and, crucially, a way to reward loyalty, consolidate power, and manage court politics without the geopolitical complexities or potential loss of autonomy that a formal marriage might entail. The turnover was not rapid, and the number of these significant figures, far from hundreds, was actually quite limited, perhaps a dozen throughout her long reign. These relationships were a public spectacle, yes, a testament to her personal agency, but they were also calculated elements of her imperial strategy, a visible demonstration of her personal power and patronage, carefully controlled and largely understood within the specific context of an absolute monarchy. The truly explosive allegations surrounding Catherine the Great's private life, the ones that transformed a powerful empress into a caricature of promiscuity, were not born from fact, but from a potent cocktail of political propaganda, rampant misogyny, and the timeless human appetite for salacious gossip. These were the engines of disinformation, churning out tales that, even today, overshadow her immense achievements and perpetuate a grossly distorted image of her reign. The infamous 500 lovers figure, the stable boy incident, and the grotesquely absurd story of her death while attempting intercourse with a horse. These were not historical accounts, but deliberately fabricated smears, weaponized to undermine her legitimacy and erode her formidable reputation. Political propaganda. Catherine inherited a deeply unstable empire and faced powerful enemies, both at home and abroad. Her coup against her husband, Peter III, though necessary for Russia's stability, was an act of usurpation, making her vulnerable to accusations of illegitimacy. Rival European powers, particularly France and Sweden, feared Russia's growing strength under her astute leadership. Weakening her reputation was a strategic move, a calculated campaign to destabilize her rule and blunt Russia's influence on the international stage. By portraying her as morally corrupt, sexually deviant, and unstable, her enemies sought to diminish her authority, discourage potential allies, and sow discord within Russia itself. Pamphlets and cartoons, often crude and wildly imaginative, circulated across Europe, depicting her in the most lurid and unflattering terms. She was painted as a modern Messalina, a Roman empress notorious for alleged depravity, suggesting that Catherine's unbridled passions rendered her unfit to rule a vast and important empire. These were not mere character assassinations. They were sophisticated 18th century information warfare, designed to destroy not just her image, but her very claim to power, influencing public opinion from the drawing rooms of London and Paris to the taverns of Warsaw. This relentless barrage of scandalous tales created a pervasive cloud of suspicion around her, subtly eroding her credibility and casting a shadow over every one of her triumphs. Misogyny and the fear of powerful women. Perhaps the most insidious and deeply rooted force behind the rumors was the profound, deeply ingrained misogyny of the era. In a patriarchal society, a woman who wielded absolute power, commanded armies, expanded an empire, and, crucially, unapologetically chose her own partners, was not merely an anomaly. She was a profound threat that defied all conventional norms. Such a woman was inherently destabilizing to the established order, a living embodiment of female agency pushed to its most extreme limits. Rather than acknowledge her formidable intellect, her strategic genius, or her unwavering dedication to Russia, qualities that would have been lauded in a male ruler, it was easier and far more comforting for many to reduce her to her sexuality. If a woman held power, it must be through sexual manipulation, not merit. If she had partners, it must be an uncontrolled, wanton promiscuity, not a reasoned strategic choice, or even a deeply felt affection. Her assertion of autonomy, her unapologetic self-determination in matters of both state and heart, was too radical to comprehend or accept, and so it was distorted into depravity. The more successful she became, the wilder and more outrageous the rumors grew, a desperate, almost primal attempt to cut her down to size, to contain her power by questioning her womanhood, her morality, and ultimately, her sanity. The stories served as a cautionary tale, a stark warning against any woman daring to step outside her prescribed societal role. Jealousy and court intrigue. Within her own glittering yet ruthless court, the highly formalized system of favorites inevitably bred intense jealousy and simmering resentment. The immense wealth, power, and influence showered upon each new favorite, the palaces, the titles, the access to the Empress's ear, created a volatile environment where disgruntled courtiers, those who failed to gain her favor, or those who saw their own ambitions thwarted, were quick to spread malicious gossip. Exaggerated tales of her generosity towards her lovers, or thinly veiled accusations of impropriety, served as potent tools for rivals to discredit favorites and potentially gain their own assent, or simply to undermine the favored individual out of spite. Whispers could be as deadly as daggers in the hothouse atmosphere of the imperial court. A subtle hint about a favorite's extravagance, a dubious claim about the Empress's alleged indiscretions, or a sly insinuation about moral laxity could quickly spread like wildfire, carefully fanned by those eager to see a rival fall. The court was a viper's nest of ambition, a place where loyalty was often conditional, and Catherine's personal life, particularly her system of patronage through her favorites, provided ample fodder for the political machinations of those who sought advantage, constantly vying for proximity to power. Sensationalism and public appetite. Finally, there was the simple, undeniable human fascination with scandal, especially when it involved royalty. Tales of forbidden love, secret trysts, lavish excesses, and alleged debauchery fueled the popular imagination, eagerly consumed by a public hungry for sensational stories that broke the monotony of daily life. The more outrageous the rumor, the more widely it spread, embroidered and embellished with each retelling, until the line between fact and fiction blurred into oblivion. The horse story, the most persistent and vile of the myths, is a perfect example of this insatiable appetite for the sensational. It is a biological impossibility, an act that defies all logic and natural law, yet it has clung to her legacy with astonishing tenacity for centuries. This enduring power is a testament not to any grain of truth, but to the potency of a truly shocking and deeply misogynistic fabrication, designed to disgust and dehumanize. These were not just whispers circulating in elite circles. They were carefully cultivated narratives of debauchery, amplified by new printing technologies and a growing public sphere, designed to define her reign by her perceived sexual excesses. Tragically, in the popular imagination, and often in historical retelling, they largely succeeded, cementing an image that obscured her monumental achievements under a thick veneer of scandal. The pervasive nature of the rumors surrounding Catherine's love life becomes even more glaring when viewed through the prism of the double standard applied to male and female rulers throughout history. Consider her contemporaries. Louis XV of France, known for his numerous mistresses, including the formidable Madame de Pompadour and Madame du Barry, whose influence was immense and openly acknowledged. Pompadour, far from being a mere dalliance, was a shrewd political operator who shaped French foreign policy, patronized the arts, and managed court affairs with an iron will. Her position as maîtresse en titre, granting her an unprecedented, albeit unofficial, seat of power. Yet, while she faced criticism for her influence, Louis XV himself was rarely, if ever, condemned for his promiscuity or deemed unfit to rule on account of these relationships. Or George I and II of Great Britain, both of whom maintained mistresses, often German noblewomen who followed them from Hanover. These royal mistresses were fixtures of the British court, sometimes mocked for their appearance or foreignness, but their presence did not fundamentally undermine the king's authority or lead to widespread moral outrage that questioned their capacity for governance. Even Peter the Great, Catherine's revered predecessor, was famous for his tempestuous personal life, his numerous liaisons outside his marriages, and his rather unregal habits. Yet his virility was often seen as part of his dynamic, forceful personality, contributing to his image as a powerful, transformative leader, not a moral failure. None of these male monarchs faced the same level of moral condemnation, the same grotesque caricatures, or the same obsessive historical focus on their sexuality that Catherine endured. For kings, particularly in the 17th and 18th centuries, the maintenance of mistresses was often an accepted, even expected, aspect of court life. Such relationships were woven into the fabric of monarchical power, often serving multiple purposes beyond mere affection or desire. As long as a legitimate heir was produced and the succession secured, a king's dalliances were largely overlooked, or even admired, as a sign of virility and potent masculinity, qualities deemed essential for a strong ruler. These relationships, while sometimes scandalous within the confines of court gossip, rarely threatened the king's overall legitimacy or overshadowed his political achievements in the historical narrative. Indeed, in many instances, a king's mistress could be a valuable political asset, a confidant, an informal advisor, or a conduit for information and influence. The French court, for instance, openly recognized the role of the maîtresse en titre, a formal position for the king's chief mistress, complete with apartments, his staff, and often a title. These women, like Madame de Montespan or Madame de Maintenon for Louis XIV, or Pompadour and Dubarry for Louis XV, held considerable sway, and their political influence was understood, if not always approved of, as part of the ecosystem of royal power. They were often women of intelligence and ambition, whose proximity to the king allowed them to operate as powerful figures in their own right, without fundamentally diminishing the king's image as the ultimate authority. Their existence was framed within the context of a male-dominated power structure, where a king's personal life, even its excesses, could be reinterpreted as an expression of his boundless energy and dominance. The criticisms leveled against them usually focused on their influence over the king, rather than the king's morality in having them. For queens and empresses, however, the rules were drastically different, governed by a rigid code of conduct born from centuries of patriarchal tradition and dynastic imperative. Their primary role was to provide legitimate heirs and to maintain an impeccable reputation for chastity and piety. Any deviation from this narrow path was not merely a personal failing, but a profound threat to the stability of the dynasty and the perceived moral order of the entire realm. A powerful woman who dared to exhibit sexual agency, to choose her own partners outside the bounds of marriage or state-sanctioned procreation, directly challenged the fundamental patriarchal assumptions of her time. Her choices were seen not as a prerogative, but as scandalous indulgence, evidence of a woman's inherent inability to control her passions, and thus, by extension, to control an empire. Such indiscretions could cast doubt on the legitimacy of any children, potentially plunging a nation into succession crises, and were perceived as a moral blight that could weaken the monarchy's spiritual and temporal authority. The very idea of a woman openly asserting her sexual autonomy, seeking pleasure or companionship on her own terms, was revolutionary and deeply unsettling to a society structured around male control and female subservience. It threatened to invert the natural order, turning the Empress from a vessel of the state's legitimacy into a symbol of dangerous, uncontrollable femininity. Catherine's situation was compounded by the fact that she was not just a queen consort, but a ruling empress, a woman who had seized power through her own intellect and ambition, an act that already defied conventional norms. She had no husband to provide male leadership or to legitimize her personal choices. She was the supreme authority, making her personal life inextricably linked to her public image and the moral health of the state. Her clear, unapologetic agency in her relationships was therefore particularly threatening. She did not seek partners for dynastic alliances, as was often expected of monarchs. She chose men based on affection, attraction, intellectual compatibility, or political convenience, a profoundly modern approach to relationships that was centuries ahead of its time. This assertion of sexual autonomy, rare for any woman of her era, let alone a monarch, was perceived as a dangerous rebellion against feminine subservience and a direct challenge to the patriarchal foundations of power. It provided her enemies with fertile ground to undermine her authority, suggesting that a woman so uncontrolled in her private life could not possibly be a stable, rational, or morally upright ruler. The political propaganda, as explored in the previous section, seized upon this vulnerability with relish, fabricating outrageous tales to paint her as a depraved Messalina, unfit for the throne. The whispered accusations of her lovers, whether real or imagined, became a shorthand for her alleged illegitimacy as a ruler, transforming her personal choices into a political liability. The very act of exercising power as a woman, especially one who chose her own partners, was twisted into evidence of moral degeneracy, rather than acknowledged as a testament to her unique position and self-determination. The historical obsession with her 500 lovers reveals far more about the deep-seated prejudices and gendered expectations of the past than it does about the reality of Catherine's remarkably effective and historically significant reign. It is a stark reminder of how a woman's power can be systematically diminished and delegitimized through the weaponization of her sexuality, a tactic designed to reduce a complex, formidable ruler to a one-dimensional caricature of promiscuity, diverting attention from her genuine accomplishments and the profound impact she had on her nation and the world. This focus serves as a powerful testament to the enduring human tendency to scrutinize and condemn female power through a lens of moral judgment that is rarely applied to men. To allow the sensationalized and often fabricated stories of Catherine the Great's love life to define her is to commit a profound injustice to one of history's most consequential rulers. Her reign, from 1762 to 1796, was a period of extraordinary transformation for Russia, marking an era known as the Golden Age of the Russian Empire. Far from being a mere seductress, Catherine was an empress deeply engaged with the intellectual currents of the European Enlightenment, a formidable politician, and an ambitious architect of imperial expansion. Her commitment to the ideals of the Enlightenment was profound. She corresponded extensively with leading philosophers of her time, including Voltaire and Denis Diderot, earning her the title of an enlightened despot. She genuinely believed in the power of reason and law to improve society. Her nakaz, instruction of 1767, a document intended to guide the revision of Russian law, drew heavily from the works of Montesquieu and Cesare Beccaria, advocating for judicial reform, religious tolerance, and the abolition of torture. While many of her reforms faced resistance and were not fully implemented, her intellectual engagement and legislative aspirations positioned Russia squarely within the broader European intellectual movement. In terms of territorial expansion, Catherine's achievements were nothing short of colossal. She dramatically expanded Russia's borders, most notably through the annexation of Crimea in 1783. Gaining crucial access to the Black Sea, a strategic warm-water port that had eluded her predecessors for centuries. Her military triumphs against the Ottoman Empire solidified Russia's position as a dominant European power. Furthermore, she oversaw the three partitions of Poland, incorporating vast swaths of new territory into the Russian Empire. These expansions were not accidental. They were the result of astute diplomacy, cunning strategy, and powerful military leadership, often orchestrated with the help of her brilliant, if controversial, favorite, Grigory Potemkin. Administrative and social reforms were also a hallmark of her reign. She restructured local governance, creating more efficient administrative units across the vast empire. She patronized education, founding the Smolny Institute, the first state-sponsored educational institution for women in Russia. While she did little to alleviate the plight of serfs, her era saw the flourishing of the arts and sciences. She founded the Imperial Public Library, amassed an astonishing art collection that formed the core of the Hermitage Museum, and encouraged scientific research. Her court became a vibrant center of culture, attracting artists, writers, and thinkers from across Europe. Economic development was another key focus. Catherine encouraged trade, reformed financial institutions, and promoted industrial growth, laying the groundwork for Russia's continued modernization. She recognized the importance of a thriving economy for a strong empire and actively sought to implement policies that would foster prosperity. Ultimately, Catherine the Great's legacy is not defined by the scandalous whispers of her personal life, but by her monumental contributions to Russia's geopolitical stature, its cultural blossoming, and its engagement with Enlightenment ideals. She was a ruler of extraordinary capability and vision, whose personal choices, while unconventional for her time, were a minor footnote compared to the vast impact of her imperial policies. To reduce her to the sum of her alleged lovers is to willfully ignore the monumental achievements of a woman who, against all odds, forged a new destiny for Russia and secured her place as one of the most significant figures in European history. Her true legend lies in the empire she built, not the rumors she endured. The enduring myth of Catherine the Great's hundreds of lovers, a narrative woven from political malice and deep-seated misogyny, serves as a powerful reminder that history is often written not just by conquerors, but by their critics. While her private life was certainly complex and unconventional, the truth is far less scandalous than the fabricated tales that have shadowed her legacy for centuries. What truly defines Catherine is her unwavering vision for Russia, her formidable intellect, and the vast, transformative empire she built. Thank you for joining us as we untangle fact from fiction in the life of this extraordinary empress. Until next time, keep questioning the narratives and remember that sometimes The greatest legends are born not from truth, but from the fear of an unconquerable woman.